Hello and welcome to The Sharpening. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a guest who has a show of her own, a show I've actually been on a couple of times called The Parker J. Cole Show. Parker is here to tell us some things about Christian fiction and nonfiction, publishing, and really just everything you could want to know if you're a Christian considering writing and publishing. Parker J. Cole is the author of the Christian horror book Dark Cherub, as well as a Christian romance entitled Many Strange Women. She has a short story called God Forsaken coming out this year in an anthology published by the Christian speculative fiction group Iron Sharpening Iron. She also has just signed the contract for the next book in her Sins of the Flesh series called The Other Man. She's also working on two single titles, one romance and the other science fiction. With that, I'd like to welcome to the show Parker J. Cole. Parker, how are you doing?
I am doing fine today, Josh. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for taking the time to do this. You know, I've been on your show a couple of times, and it's great to have you on mine. I'm glad that we were able to do this. For the viewers and listeners, Parker was actually the one that had the idea for the topic of this episode. And when she told me, I was really excited because this is something we haven't talked about too much on The Sharpening, and I believe it to be a very important topic. I know for me, when I was starting out in writing and everything I'm doing now, a show like this would have been a huge help. So I appreciate you coming up with the idea and bringing it to me, and I'm glad that we're able to do this.
You know, Josh, I'm glad to be able to talk about Christian fiction and nonfiction and publishing in general. I think with the increase of independent authors in the publishing world, it's going to give Christians a lot more opportunities to bring about certain messages in whatever venue God gives them. And that's why I'm so glad to be able to do the show and just tell people what I've learned through my publishing career, my writing career. So I'm just glad to be here to help sharpen your audience.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Those little wordplay, sharpen, you know.
Yeah, I like that.
Sharpening, you know.
Good deal. Good deal. So before we get started, could you give us a rundown of your testimony, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today?
Well, I actually have a pretty, I want to say boring testimony, and I say that not because it's boring, just I don't, you know, some people come from drugs, some people come from wayward lifestyles. Not me. I grew up in church. My father is a minister, my mother is a teacher, and I came to know Christ when I was 8 years old, and then I became to really know Christ when I was about 16 years old, and I rededicated my life, as some people say, back to Christ, and just became more focused. I have had ups and downs in my life, but nothing drastic, but I thank the Lord for everything. It wasn't until my writing career started to take off about 2 to 3 years ago that I really understood where God was putting me at. And I didn't have a lot of major trials in my life like some people have, but what I did have helped me become a better Christian in Christ, to be a better follower. And then, like Josh, you were on my show when you talk about your book Disclosure, that really opened up a lot of things to me, not just to take things at face value. Go ahead and research it. Find out what the Bible says about things, and I have you to thank for that. So I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to kind of give back to what you gave to me. So I'm so thankful to be with you today. So that's my testimony in a nutshell. And all that good stuff. Oh, and I am married. I don't know if you're going to ask this already, but I am married with my husband. We've been married for 7 years next month. And the only daughter I have has 4 legs. And this is my dog. Her name is Sarah. You can see her on my website a little bit later. But that's my baby. That's the joy of my life. So.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, that's great. I'm a family man too, and yeah, I'm married and. Yeah, kids. It's a challenge. Take your time. It's a challenge. There's no rush. I love my kids to death. I really do. But oh man, there are days.
Oh man, that's funny.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed my book, and you know, it's always a blessing for me to hear that from people who have read it, because you know that's kind of how I got started in this too. I had I took everything from face value and everything, and you know, God kind of brought me through some ways of looking at things a little deeper and trying to get at the root of what's really being said, and that's basically what that book was about, and a whole bunch of other weird stuff. But yeah, I'm really glad that you I'm really glad you enjoyed it. That's awesome, and it was a pleasure to be on your show and talk about it. So I got to ask, because I know my listeners are probably, and viewers now, since we're doing video interviews now, are probably wondering about this. Christian romance. How exactly does that work? I think usually when we think of romance novels, we have a certain maybe sexualized secular view of what that is, and we usually wouldn't equate Christianity with it, but you have found a way, and impressively so. How exactly is Christian romance different from secular romance?
Well, secular romance, and I used to read a ton of them when I was a young girl. I used to read a ton of them because I, couldn't do anything else. So I used to read them a lot, and my mother didn't know about it. So as a child, I would tear off the covers of the books and then hide them inside other books so she wouldn't know I was reading them because I knew I shouldn't read them. So, but romance in general do tend to be more sexualized. Romance doesn't just come in one flavor, as they say. It does have different stages of romance. You have sweet romance, which is not nearly as sexual. It's not based on the physical. And then you have the extreme end, which is erotica, which is just basically eroticism, just to titillate the mind and things of that nature. With Christian romance, that could be divided too, because Christian romance is still being developed. But the two major sections of Christian romances is one is called edgier Christian romance, which is what I write, and the other is called maybe sweet or inspirational romance. To kind of give you an idea of edgier romance tends to talk about subjects that a lot of sweeter Christian romance or inspirational romances won't talk about. So I may talk about, in my book, I talk about some major stuff like my characters, they're flawed. I would like to think they're deeply flawed. Whereas a sweet romance, they won't necessarily have flawed characters like that. Another thing about edgy romance that they may mention body parts. Nothing sexual per se, but just body parts, like you may hear the word breast, or you may hear, some kissing like around the neck or whatever. Whereas sweet romances won't concentrate on that. Why is that important? Because back, I think it was the 50s, CBA, which is Christian Bookseller Association, came up with guidelines for Christian fiction in general. And there are certain things you had to apply to be considered Christian fiction. And you couldn't do certain things. You couldn't have profanity. You couldn't have all kind of things in there. Well, a lot of that has started to change with the indie movement. And so now you have a section of Christian romance that is more sweet, a section of Christian romance that's more edgier, which is what I tend to write. And some people consider edgier Christian romance as just trying to be more dirty without being dirty, and that's not the case. The thing is that a lot of the big traditional Christian publishers don't want to hear or don't want that type of fiction. They don't want that type of fiction. But I think as more people, as we seek to be more real with readers and seek to be more real with the public, we need those type of romances that don't necessarily worship the physical sexual relation between a man and a woman. They can still touch on it, still show tension between characters, and still have a good story to bring about God's message. One of the reviews in my book, I guess she was disappointed because she thought it was probably erotica. I don't know how she thought that, but one reviewer said, "Not what I expected. There was no sex." And I said, "I'm so sorry to disappoint you, and I can't help you with that." But others have been blessed by my book because it is a little bit edgier, because I do have flawed characters who really need a redemptive power of Christ. And so I thank God for the message that He gave me. So that's kind of a little bit of Christian romances, from two sides, edgier and then more inspirational, sweet romance.
Cool. Yeah, that's good. It's always good to be able to. I think a lot of times in maybe older generation Christian fiction, well, there is even some really traditional Christian fiction nowadays that's like this. It's too one-dimensional, and it takes a lot of the realism out of it.
Yeah, they're super Christians, and I haven't met a super Christian yet. So, and I say that because people need. I think readers are becoming more sophisticated now. They want to be a good book. They don't want a flat story. They don't want to necessarily be predictable, especially romance, pretty much happily ever after. But you want to go through a roller coaster to get to happily ever after. You want to don't make it just 1, 2, and 3. That's why I was kind of surprised that Amish fiction is so hot right now for Christian romance. I don't see the attraction, but if you like Amish romance, that's fine. But I don't see the attraction for it. But a lot of people think of Christian romance as just Amish fiction. We're not as some of the more edgier stuff that a lot of other indie Christian authors are starting to write.
Yeah, I,
Mhm.
I actually haven't heard of that genre, but that it's definitely interesting. And I always appreciate fiction that where the reader, in Christian fiction, when the reader can identify with the character, and when how you were talking about flaws and stuff, we all have flaws.
Mhm.
Um, and all the sexual sins and everything, especially in our culture today, it's huge. I mean, how many people could identify with that? A lot.
Yes, a
So
lot.
if
Yeah.
anything, yeah,
Yeah. Josh, it's good you say that because a lot of Christians deal with premarital sex, they deal with pornography, they deal with addictions. So I think Christian romance should address these issues, not just slide over them. I mean, they don't have to be graphic, of course not. And my book does not have any graphic sex or anything like that, but address them. Be open and honest about this topic, and even not even like sexual stuff, but like sexual abuse crimes and things of that nature. You don't have to be graphic about it, but you can still address it and still say, you know what, there's someone who's going to read this book that may have gone through this and they need hope, help, and healing. And I hope maybe through a fictional work this will help them. And that's what I hope to gain with my Christian romance, at least, not with my other stuff, with my Christian romance at least, to still tell a love story because I love a love story, but still be able to give God's message to someone who may be hurting.
that's awesome. That's awesome. That's really cool. I really admire you for that.
Okay.
It's something that a term that I've been kind of hearing lately, indie movement. Can you define that for us and tell us what the big deal about the indie movement is?
Well, the indie movement in general deals with independence. That means people who are doing their own thing without the help of big movers and shakers. In particular, I'm more familiar with the indie writer movement, indie author movement. And the indie author movement basically is that a lot of people are self-publishing. Within the last 10 years, self-publishing has exploded. Thanks a lot to Amazon and programs like that. Amazon really helped authors who weren't getting recognized by traditional publishers to get recognized. Amazon understood that, hey, we don't need to have one big bestseller, have millions of small sellers. And one thing one of my guests on my show said one time is that Amazon gave her back her Amazon with their KDP and self-publishing services gave her back her self-respect, that she was a good author. And I understand exactly what she means because when I was going through my journey for traditional publishing, I have been rejected 13 times. And there's nothing like getting rejected, knowing that your work is good, knowing that this is a good product, and someone keeps saying no. It bites like a bear into your flesh. It is an absolutely horrific feeling. And so with the indie movement, basically a lot of authors are self-publishing. And they're self-publishing, and this is turning the publishing world, the traditional legacy houses, upside down with the indie movements. To kind of give you a better example, we'll use America, and I'm using this example from a woman who's a social media expert named Kristen Lamb. And the way she described it was this: England and the American colonies. The traditional publishing houses are England, and the 13 colonies are the indie authors. We're basically telling the traditional publishers, we don't want you anymore. We don't need you to become important. We don't need you to validate our writing. So that's what the indie movement is doing. That's why so many people are self-publishing. And with the indie movement, they're able to publish at their own pace. They're able to publish what they want, how they want, when they want. And they're starting to get followers and fan base depending on their platform. The traditional publishers usually have restrictions and certain things they want you to do. You can't put this in there, or you can't put this in there, make this more hotter, make this more steamier, don't do this. They give you all these kind of regulations and structures within their organization. They also set the price. They also design the cover for you. So everything is given to the traditional publishing houses, whereas the indie author has all control over their work. They retain all rights to their work and they get all the profits. With traditional publishing houses, you have to split the profits with them. But with that in mind, the indie movement still has some things they have to get the kinks out of, because not every indie author is successful because of things they don't know. And I can get to that a little bit later. But that's what's happening right now with the indie movement. We're basically telling the publishing houses, we don't need you anymore to validate what a good author is. Basically, an author can develop their own fan base, become a best-selling author without the help from traditional publishing houses.
Good deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll definitely get more into because I'm a self-published author. I've written I think Well, it depends on how you count it, but I have between 7 and 8 books.
Right.
One book is an anthology of 4 or 5 other books. Um, but there's also extra writing in there, so it is. I guess you could say it's 8. But so I have a few books out, and I've self-published every single one, and I've had to. There definitely are some kinks. I've had to learn the hard way, but there's a lot of advantage too, because before I really got into this. I tried getting into fiction writing,
Hmm.
which was a train wreck, but it needed to be. It wasn't Christian by any means. It was just regular secular fiction that I shouldn't have been writing anyway. But so it's a good thing it failed miserably. But I tried with that one. I tried going the traditional route, and oh man, that it's brutal. The rejections, and it can get
Yes.
brutal.
It
Um,
hurts.
yeah, and we'll definitely talk about some of the ways around certain things like that. But before we get into that, what is so we have indie publishing and we have the more traditional publishing happening nowadays, and a lot of things are changing. So what's happening in the publishing industry today?
I kind of alluded to it earlier that the publishing industry is changing. If anyone wants to be a writer, and I'm just going to say whether secular or Christian or anything else, if you want to be a writer, now is the time to do it. So if you are sitting on your writing talent, stop right now, because right now is the best time to do it. The indie authors are shaping the publishing industry. It is no longer the traditional publishing houses. As a matter of fact, due to the indie publishing movement, the traditional houses have to either get with the program or get left behind. Now, does that necessarily mean that the traditional publishers will completely go away? No, because they bring certain advantages that the indie movement can't bring. But at the same time, everything is being reshaped by this indie movement. Traditional publishing houses are going to have to figure out how do we still make sales, because for a traditional publishing house, that's what's very important, is making sales, and still compete with indie authors who are making tons of money without our help at all. How do we lure more authors? How do we get the authors that we currently have to stay with us instead of those authors who already have a fan base, thanks to the traditional publishing houses? How do we keep them? So a lot of things are changing with the traditional publishing industry. It's being flipped upside down. It's no different like the Kristen Lamb example of the colonies versus England. We're not going to be associated with you anymore. So that's what's happening right now. The publishing industry is in a state of flux as it tries to find out where it's going to be. I have my own predictions as to what will happen, because there'll be more of an indie movement where publishers are seeking authors in the indie movement who already have a platform, whereas before a traditional publishing house will help you build your platform. Now that's not the case anymore. You have to build your own platform. We'll talk about that, about how to build your platform and stuff like that a little bit later. And with that, they'll be like, okay, well, since you have this platform, we could probably make more sales with you as opposed to an indie author who doesn't have a platform. And we'll talk about that too. So that's what's happening right now with the publishing industry. It's in a state of flux, but it's the best time to be an author.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's that's why I'm so glad that we're doing this show, because we have the best of both worlds, I think, with you and I, because you have the traditional publishing stuff down. That's what you've been doing, and I know nothing about that. I just know about self-publishing. So that's why I'm so glad that we're able to do this. So if somebody out there is considering getting into Christian writing, or if they have something that they want to get published, should they just consider indie publishing and forget about traditional publishing, or how should they choose what avenue they want to go down with that?
That's a really good question, and it's not an easy yes or no answer. For one thing, not everyone has the indie author spirit. Not everyone wants to sit and try to build a platform, try to do all their marketing, try to get all the funds they need for their books, because with the indie publishing movement, one of the drawbacks, considering who you're talking to, is that you handle all the expenses. You have to find your own graphic designer. You have to get your own editing done or do your own editing. You have to get your own marketing. You have to do your own publicity. So that's one of the drawbacks, in my opinion, to the indie movement, is that all the costs fall on you. Yes, the profits go to you, but all the cost falls on you too. And then with traditional publishing, it kind of takes the edge off of it, but you may have to split royalty fees with the publishing house. Maybe if you have an agent, you have to split it with them. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're going to get a lot of help. But what I would tell a writer if they're considering to self-publish is think about what you want to do. Some authors do want to do their own thing, have full control of their own work. They don't want to share it with anyone. Then you have the indie spirit to go ahead and do that, do your own marketing, get your own street team taken care of, your everything. You can do that yourself. Other authors want help. And the way they get help is that they can publish through various methods similar to indie, but not quite indie. For example, some authors, I keep saying publishers, some authors use a vanity press. And a vanity press basically says, will you pay us a large amount of money and we'll set up everything for you. And so I did that with my first book, Dark Cherub, where I paid a vanity press to set up everything for me. In retrospect, I probably should not have done that, but at the same time, a book is out there now. I didn't have to do a lot because I didn't have a lot of time. I was working and doing all kind of stuff. And then where I currently am with the indie, I'm in the traditional publisher, but they're not traditional. They're a small press that is really working with me to get my book and works out there, which I really admire about that. And the traditional publisher, it takes longer for your good book to get published, but they will do a lot of marketing and a lot of things up front for you, so you don't have to do it. So you really have to weigh the cost of how much time you have, how much funds you have available. Do you want to get out there and start marketing for yourself? But I will tell any author, whether it's indie or traditionally represented, you are going to have to market. The days where you have a marketing team are done because publishers don't want to spend money on that. That's why when they look at some indie authors looking to probably lure them to their publishing houses, they're looking for those indie authors who have platforms that already have a fan base. So that's something to think about too. So what I would tell someone is do what is comfortable for you. If you want to do the indie spirit, take care of everything, do that. But if you want help, figure out which of the traditionally represented pathways to go, whether it's small press like I have, a vanity press like I did, or traditional press where you have to sell yourself to a publishing house via query or agent. But they all have pros and cons. I don't think one is just the exact answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was getting my book proposal together for disclosure, I was originally going to go down the traditional, path and get it traditionally published. So I wrote the query letter, I wrote a book proposal for it, and then I had the book. So I ended up doing like way more writing than I needed to. But it was actually my friend. Well, I had just met him at the time online. Rob Skiba, he's another author that writes similar to some of the things that I write about, and I was talking to him, and he was actually the one that convinced me to try out self-publishing, so that's what he does. And I remember thinking, man, I don't want to go through all the work because I'm gonna have to nobody knows me. It would be so much easier if I can find a publisher that can get me out there and everything. But the more I thought about it, just the more that seemed like God was leading me that way, the self-publishing way. And I found he introduced me to Create Space, which works with Amazon and the KDB Publishing and all that. And I've been using it ever since. And I mean, there are ups and downs to it, and there are a lot of things to watch out for. And but overall, I mean, it's been an awesome experience, and I'm happy with it. But another reason why I'm glad that we're doing this show, because when I first started, there were things I wish I knew then that I know now that would have greatly helped. So what do you think people are looking for in books nowadays?
I think people are looking for sophisticated plots, really interesting characters they can either love to hate or hate to love, and they're looking for really interesting plot lines. People have said there isn't really a new story, and I agree, there probably isn't a new story, but it's how you do the twist everybody likes to do. And especially when it comes to Christian fiction, we have an opportunity to take the message of God and embeds so many different elements of it in so many interesting ways. And romance is one way I do, and also Christian speculative fiction. And my particular taste is actually like horror. I like horror and sci-fi. But I need to clarify horror because I was on another show one time, and the woman said, Christian horror? She said, what is that? She said, it's a bunch of Christians killing people. That's what she said. And I said, no, it's not that. And then when I did the show one time, I mentioned about a book that won an award recently. It was a Christian zombie story. And someone said, Christian zombies? And so my husband had never heard of that. He said, what? Bunch of people are trying to give salvation to zombies? He's just like, what is this? But see, that's the beauty of this indie movement and the current publishing era, is that Christians now have so many different opportunities to bring the message of God in so many unique ways, not in just romance, not in just sci-fi, but in steampunk and horror and mystery and sci-fi, just so many different ways to do it. And that's why I think people are looking for something new or something old in new wineskins, as some people may say. Usually the connotation is a negative connotation, but in this regard, I think it's a good one. And that's what the indie movement is giving many small authors the ability to tell the message of God in so many different ways. And that's what I think people are looking for. Interesting plots, characters we can relate to, and fresh ideas.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll add too with nonfiction. That's pretty much what I write. I've been thinking about possibly sometime in the far future,
right,
maybe trying Christian fiction. It is something I would like to do someday. But and I do kind of have an idea that I've been playing around with the past year or so for that. If and when I decide to do it, but it's not going to be for a while, at least a couple of years, but probably even longer than that. But so I pretty much write nonfiction, and I think people with that I think they're looking for things that are, at least the audience that I write to, they're looking for things that are biblically sound, yet maybe something they haven't heard before, or something that kind of it may stray from tradition, but it doesn't stray from the Bible.
Yeah.
And I find that they're the type of audience that I write to anyway, and there's a lot of different Christian audiences, but the one that I write to is mainly the fringe Christian. We're kind of labeled as that, but that's kind of what they're looking for. So if there's the viewers, listeners out there, if they have something like that, I've found it's. I don't think there's as much competition with it, and that's kind of another thing I wanted to ask you about. But with the nonfiction that I write, I've found more authors that have wanted to help and wanted to kind of help bring me up to where they, and I've only been doing this a little longer than a year, and if it wasn't for the help of everybody else kind of giving me advice and opening some doors for me, I never would have made it this far on my own. That's one thing that I really like about this genre that I write in, and I think a lot of Christian nonfiction is like that. With Christian fiction, and especially in like the more traditional publishing sense, do you find that to be the case, or is there a lot of competition, or what have you had to deal with in those regards?
Well, one thing I really like about the indie movement, and you kind of alluded to it when you talk about people helping you, is that the indie movement is ushering in an era where no one's competing against each other. If anything, we are all colleagues. We're all colleagues. There are 7 billion people in the world. Chances are, Josh, not everyone's going to like my book. Chances are. Not everyone's going to be interested in Christian romance. I can guarantee it. No one's going to be interested. Everyone's not going to be interested in Christian romance. And then with Christian nonfiction, you do have to get your colleagues together to make sure that the information that you have is sound. You don't want to give anything that's not sound. But people may say, that's a different way of looking at it, or that's a different way, or thank you for bringing out that one point out. And so that's why today is such a great time to be a Christian author. I don't see it as competition. But I have met some Christian fiction writers who have been caught in a competitive spirit with other writers. Recently, one young lady entered a contest, and another author gave her a low review on her book because she was jealous that the woman had made it so far into this particular contest. I won't mention it because it'll be too identifying, and I said, that's absolutely insane. We're colleagues. I don't have to down your book in order to get you to read my book. And that's probably one of the problems with the indie authors. Some indie authors are not sophisticated enough to know that we're all in this together. We're all writing different things, especially for Christian indie authors. We should really be sticking together because we all want to give the message of Christ. So there shouldn't be any competition. It really shouldn't. But there are those who don't understand that, hey, we can all work together to bring this about. And I am one of those people, with my show, I encourage Christian nonfiction and fiction authors on my show. I don't try to put denominational structures behind it. It have to be nominal Christian. Like, I don't want you to say Jesus Christ is an alien. No,
yeah, exactly.
My show is not for you. So this is just not for you. So, but
that was the first thing that you asked me before you had me on your show. I remember that. You're like, yeah, because you're
like, you're not gonna say Jesus Christ the alien, are you, Josh? Because my show may not be for you. Hey, brotherly love, right?
Yeah.
It was because I've met some people, and some things, if you're not discerning enough, which is why I like books like yours to help you be more discerning. If you're not discerning or you don't have like apologetics training, and I don't have that much apologetics training because I love apologetics, but I'm focusing on different things, so I can't do it like I used to do it. But if you're not careful, some people will say, well, I'm a Christian author, and then they slip in something that's maybe like New Age or something that's not was supposed to be, and you're able to catch that. That's why we need Christian nonfiction authors like yourself to say, hey, this is what the Bible says, this is what's happening here, sound doctrine and all that good stuff. Here's a little spin on it, but it's not changing the message of what Christ is getting across. Like when you were on my show talking about gospel harmony, it didn't do that. You kind of mentioned, I had never thought about it. I just thought maybe it was a couple of different angels. And then when you mentioned about the angel of the Lord, I was like, oh yeah. I just kind of went like, oh yeah. That's totally awesome. That totally makes sense. And that's the type of things that we need. So there should not be any competition, to answer your question, but sometimes there is. But if all the authors realize, hey, we're all colleagues, we all could get a piece of this giant 7 billion piece pie, it shouldn't be that way.
That's awesome. That's been generally my experience too. As people are, there have been one or two that have been kind of competitive, but it's usually people that aren't really that into this anyway. Like it's not somebody that you're really gonna hear on like Prophecy in the News or something like that. They're kind of, I don't want to be like insulting, but they're kind of more low level, and they're trying to work their way. They're trying to work their way up in like one of the worst ways that you can. Yeah. And but the people that are already established in this generally, of course I don't know all of them, but the ones that I do know have been extremely helpful and really willing to help. So yeah, for those out there who whether nonfiction or fiction, whether indie or traditional, I would say it never hurts to try to contact some of the people that you look up to or that you admire their work, because it can always help. That has helped me open up some doors, and I mean, even in doing my show and everything too. Yeah. So it's been good. So we've mentioned a few ways, but how else have Christians been able to take advantage of the indie writer movement?
Well, one thing that Christian authors have done, they've started to coalesce into groups, into associations. Like, I'm part of a Christian speculative fiction group called Sharpening Iron. Our current web presence right now is on Facebook. And what we do, we talk, drink, eat speculative fiction of all kinds. Because I like horror, that kind of falls into my place. Now, when I say horror, some people may think I'm talking blood-drenched Christian horror, and it's not necessarily that. It's not. I mean, I'm not having people getting their heads cut off. That may happen, but I'm not necessarily getting their heads cut off. But it's how you use this genre to reach people who may be drawn to that type of thing, and you can still bring a message of Christ through. Like the young lady, her name is Pauline Creed. She wrote the Christian zombie YA story called Sanctuary, and it's a zombie story. And it starts off, and you will probably like it, Josh, because she takes a spin on Revelations, and you gotta, like the End Times, you gotta check it out. It's called Sanctuary, and it won an award, for Christian fiction, but it's a Christian zombie story. And so one thing that we're all doing as speculative fiction authors is that we're bringing all this together and we're talking about the message of Christ, how we can do it. We're exploring these different ideas. The other organization I'm part of is called Christian Indie Authors, and basically this group has been around for some time, but it's on Facebook as well, but they also have a website called Christian Indie Authors, and we all get together and share advice, marketing tips, resources, editing tips. How does this passage sound? How does that passage sound? We try not to get too into the theological debates because we all come from various Christian walks of life, but what coalesces us together is the family feel that we're all in together. We're all bringing about Christ. So we have some people who do romance, some people who do sci-fi, mystery, YA, what have you, and we all come together. So that's one advantage that the indie movement has done for the Christian writers. The other is that we formed a familial bond because we're all trying to get the message of Christ across, and that makes it to where we can say, hey, I want to talk about my book on your blog. May I do that? Sure. Can I talk about your book on your radio show? Sure. So now we're not only forming organizations, now we're forming bonds with each other because we're using each other not as rungs on the ladder, but we're helping each other up the ladder. So no one's being stuffed in anyone's head. We're just reaching down, helping others while we're being helped by somebody else. There's a young lady, her name is Lisa Grace, and she is in the process of her books becoming either a TV show or a movie, and it's called Angels in the Shadows. And she's this indie author, and she sold her whole series, and it's just wonderful for her. So, of course, for me, I'm going to keep her right next to me in my pocket. How do you get your book to become a series? There's not an author who wouldn't like that at all, but she's just a great help. But she doesn't hold the information in. She shares it. Because that's what this indie movement does for Christians, is that you share information. You don't have to hold it in. You don't have to, because we're all in this together. Another way that Christians can take advantage of indie writer movement is that they can begin to start their own careers. They can start their own writing careers. Like mine tends to be Christian. My aim is to make my career Christian speculative fiction and romance, but others may want to do mystery, others may want to do something else, or like you do nonfiction, teaching, edifying, helping, bringing awareness to other issues around the world. So that's what this indie movement is doing, building careers one person at a time. So there are a lot of different ways that Christians can take advantage of the indie movement.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's generally that's been my experience with this whole thing, and I'm really hoping that this show will be able to encourage other writers, because I mentioned before when I first started, when I decided to go the self-publishing route, and really either route you take, there's going to be hard work. It just it depends on what type, but I thought it was going to be this monumental task, that it would just be by the grace of God, and it was. But I mean, it seemed impossible, because at the time, I was being more opened up to things that I'm writing about now, like with prophecy or with different, a lot of times better, more accurate ways of looking at things. From the Bible, apart from a traditional view. And I remember I was just soaking this stuff up. I was watching and listening to a lot of L.A. Marzulli and Doug Hamp, Rod Skiba, and just, the list goes on and on. All the authors and researchers that were doing conferences and stuff. I mean, I just soaked all that stuff up, and that was what kind of led me and inspired me to work on disclosure, because I thought, man, because I came from a really traditional background, so I'm thinking, okay, I know a lot of these other researchers did too, so maybe I can contribute and help people that have been stuck in a traditional mindset to kind of wake up and realize that the Bible is exciting. There is stuff in the Bible that you don't know about, believe it or not.
A lot, actually.
Yeah, because that was something that I didn't believe. I thought that I pretty much knew everything that was in there, and wow, was I wrong? And so I wanted to bring light to that excitement and everything. But going back to the others helping out others, I didn't know any of these people that I was watching personally.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know them at all. Didn't know what kind of people they were. I just knew that they had a lot of good research, and it inspired me. So I decided, well, what's it gonna hurt? If I try to write one of them or a couple of them and tell them, who I am and what I'm doing. I figured probably since they're on TV and stuff, I didn't think I was gonna
Mm-hmm.
really have any luck getting anybody to write me back. And I mean, I was surprised. I was getting phone calls. People were really writing me back. I think there's this. Let's see, how should I word it? The area that I write in, it's not mainstream by any means. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Christianity in itself, the mainstream part of it, the stuff that really sells, like stuff that promotes prosperity gospel, stuff like that, it's
Yeah.
not worth writing about.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that I write about, and I'm not saying mine's any better than anything else that's biblically true. It's just this is where I'm at, but it's not that mainstream, but it's still, it gets on TV and stuff like that. And I think that other researchers in the field, other authors, they actually want to help other people who want to do this, who want to write about this, and want to, maybe do a show like this, or write a book, or go out and do conferences. And I mean, it was stunning, the amount of assistance and help and really good advice on anything that I could want to know that came out of this. So I'm glad that it sounds like the same is generally true on your side of things with the fiction and traditional publishing. That's awesome.
I think that's the uniqueness of why this is happening. And this is personal opinion, is that with the indie movement, okay, let me back up. What it is that I believe is that arts in general are starting to be suppressed, because I personally believe art is an expression of the soul. It is not an expression of the mind, like some people say we're just material. I think it's an expression of the soul. And it's not just even like Christian art, it's just art in general. There's like this very subtle movement to get rid of art. Not writing, painting, singing. Well, singing pretty much goes, but to kind of conceptualize into like this concrete thing. And art is an expression of something inward. And when we write, that's an expression of things. When we paint, anything like that. And so with this indie movement, we're telling people who are trying to shut down the expression of the soul, and for Christian authors particularly, to try to shut down the gospel message, you can't. Because this is an expression of our spirit, of what's coming outside of us. And that's one guy, I saw his book. I didn't get a chance to read it, but he postulates that the next war front is through the arts. Like the next warriors up front, have been intellectuals and they have been missionaries. We'll be artists, because we're going to come up and say, hey, we can still talk about the gospel, and you may not even know the gospel's being weaved through this whole story. You may not even know that until you go, oh, I know what that is. I mean, look at C.S. Lewis. Look at J.R.R. Tolkien. They use these massive fantasy worlds to bring about Christian messages that are so subtle that if you're not careful, you may miss it. But then at the end you go, oh my gosh. I mean, who can remember The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? I mean, that was it. I mean, it couldn't have been more plainer at that moment when the lion sacrificed his life and all these other kinds. Then he came back to life. You're like, oh my gosh, that's what the Lord did for me. So you can't. Those are subtle messages being woven through fiction. So that's why I said that's one of the nice things about this, is that, and I kind of agree with the guy that the next war front is through the artist. We'll be the ones to talk about the message. We're going to take it to all the world. Now we don't have to necessarily become missionaries to go into all the world and preach the gospel. We're doing it from in front of our computers at home via the indie movement.
Yeah, absolutely. We have so much opportunity to get the message out, and I think with somebody starting out like I know how I was, the enemy will sow a lot of doubt and say, it's too much. You're not going to be able to do this. But if it's God's will, nothing can stop you from doing it unless you used your own free will to just not do it. But that's obviously not something that we would recommend because it's well worth it. But yeah, I mean, just imagine if C.S. Lewis, I mean, I'm sure he had doubts when he first started. And look, they're still making movies based on his book, and they're amazing. I mean, they're phenomenal movies. And you never know what stuff is going to turn into, and you will never know if you don't get out there and try. And exactly.
I think that's a lot of things that people do. They get scared to try, and you shouldn't be afraid to try.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And you know, like we said before, there are people out there willing to help, and you just gotta reach out and just email one of them, or you know, some of them have provided numbers. You can call one of them. There's a lot of ways to get a hold of Facebook, because that's been a huge tool for me.
Yes,
that's actually how you and I met. I remember
through Facebook.
Yep, you put up a post saying that you were I think you were just starting a radio show about writing, and you wanted to know if there are writers or out there that would want to be on. So I was like, oh, I will. And this was right after Disclosure was released. I had only done one interview before that. That was on Doug Hamp's show, but I knew him, so
right.
that kind of helped. So this was the first time that I really kind of put myself out on a limb and said, I'll take this opportunity. I'll do it. I don't know you or your show, but let's do it. Look, we're it's been about a year, and we're still talking. We're still on each other's shows, and it's been awesome.
It's absolutely wonderful, and there's no competition, because why would there be? Like that be
exactly.
We're here to help each other out, and it's particularly awesome. And when we did your show, because you did it with Chuck, and when we did your show, it's probably one of the highest rated shows I've had, to be honest with you. Don't tell anyone else I said that. Shh. So, but it was one of the highest rated shows, I think, because you both brought something to the table. We were talking about scandals, and you talked about church and scandals in the church, something like that. And people were like, this is a real topic we have to discuss. And that comes back to your other question, what are people looking for? Sophisticated characters in fiction, but they want to talk about those things that people don't want to talk about. And I'm all for it. Bring it on. So I'm all for it. So it's been wonderful.
That's awesome. Yeah, same here. I'm all for it, and just the sense of community that this type of work brings is amazing. And yeah, if people are interested in listening to that show, I have the link up on my website, ministudyministry.com. It links directly to Parker's show, and it's you just go to ministudyministry.com, and under television/radio appearances, click on there, and then I have them in chronological order, so at the bottom of the page it should be the first or second link there, and it'll say I think the show is called The Right Stuff with
Parker J.
Parker J. So if people want to listen to that one, it's still up on there, and the show that I did recently on the Parker J. Cole show is still I have that up there now. So why do you mentioned this before? Why do you think this is the best time to be a writer?
I think one of the reasons why it's the best time to be a writer, because you don't have to dream about being seen by a traditional publishing house. I hate to sound new agey, and I'm not trying to, but you really hold your writing career in your own hand. You can really fashion your writing career. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to be like, oh, why did I do that? Why did I do this? How come I didn't do that? I should have done this. You're going to make those mistakes. But right now, you can make those mistakes and still continue to build a fan base, because you'll have loyal followers who will follow you every step of the way. And that's why I think it's one of the best times to be a writer right now. If you want to write, you don't have to sit on your dream anymore. You can write. Now, of course, we do want the Lord to guide us in everything that we do. We do want the Lord to guide us. So I'm not saying, don't ask the Lord for help, because He'll lead you in the right path too, because you don't want to make those wrong mistakes if you don't have to. But right now, if you have the dream to be a writer, it can be a reality sooner than you think. Even if you have a manuscript, let's say that's amateurish, you can get feedback from people, and you can get it done, and then tomorrow you can have it online. Tomorrow. You can have it tonight, get it looked at by somebody. Tomorrow it could be online. Your dream just became reality. And I'm not trying to talk new agey, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's just, it doesn't have to wait. You don't have to wait any longer. That was something I wish I had 10 years ago, because these things were not, actually 12 years ago, these things were not there when I first wanted to be a writer. Now these things are. And your children, because I've interviewed kids on my show who are authors, young adults, high schoolers, all of them, people who have had disabilities, like one young lady, she's written like 5 books now, and she has OCD and Asperger's, and she's written 5 books. And I've noticed something too is that this publishing industry doesn't stop based on normal people. Anyone, I mean, I say normal in quotations, but anyone can write a book now. And I've had people on the show who've been autistic, and they're writing. This is the best time to do it. There's almost no barriers for the reason why you can't write, especially for the Christian. Now you can get that message out there that you know that God has in your heart.
That's so cool, and I can really, I definitely agree with that. You know, I can personally identify with what you're saying about about making many mistakes, because I certainly did too. Oh man, and you know, I still do. I still mess stuff up, or I still, you know, I'll do something with writing or a blog or a show or something. I think, you know, next day I'll think I really could have did that differently. But the great thing about this area, and with indie publishing like this, is that there's breathing room. We're allowed to make those mistakes, and it's not going to ruin your career or anything.
Yes.
You learn from them, and you build your career because of those. Because of some of those mistakes, because learning from them. And of course, it's always good to have a head start if you know what some of the mistakes are ahead of time to not make them. That always helps. So I'd love to ask you, what are some tips that you would give writers about to start their careers, or what mistakes have you made that you could see others possibly making?
Some of the tips that I would give new writers is to, first of all, give yourself a break. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. We're all going to do them. I'm pretty sure even if you're an established writer, you've made some mistakes. So give yourself a break. The other thing is kind of relating to marketing. Well, let me back up. The other things I would give you tips on is the writing process. Make sure that you don't let perfectionism stop your writing. Trying to make sure every single word, every single phrase, every punctuation, every syntax is correct. Perfectionism will stop you from writing because you will never have it perfect. And I say that because there are some people out there who want to make sure they have a perfect manuscript. But a perfect manuscript, to me, doesn't really exist. People want a good story, not necessarily perfection, if you know what I mean. So that relates to the writing process. The other thing is to get beta readers. Beta readers are those who read your manuscript once it's finished and give you constructive criticism on it. This is something I did not have my first book, Dark Cherub. I didn't have that. I just kind of said, oh, my mom read it, my sister read it, it must be great. But now I have beta readers who can give you constructive criticism on it and say, hey, this didn't make sense to me. Or, can you explain this a different way? I don't understand what you meant here. And they give you that feedback and can use it constructive to make your work better. Now, a beta reader can be family member, but personally, I think you should work with your inner colleagues, like fellow authors. Now, what happens with fellow authors, though, is that sometimes they want to write your work in the way they would say it. So you have to be careful to know that beta readers are there to help you, but you don't always have to take their advice. If you're fine with the way it sounds, then you're fine with it. But it's nice to get feedback from people who aren't your family members. The other thing is to, after you have your beta readers and you redo your manuscript, get a very good editor. We're not talking about someone who knows how to put periods. We need someone who does your content development, who does line-by-line editing. I would suggest, if you don't have the money, save up the money for it. Because one of the things that indie authors have a bad rap for is that some of the books look poorly completed. There's a lot of editing, editing, typos, and things of that nature. So make sure you have a good editor. Go ahead and get the money for it. You can drop me an email. I can help out with some editors that I know, because I've branched out, so I know a lot of different editors. Or maybe you can even use a software, but I really would suggest a human editor. But if you don't have the money, maybe use a software to at least catch some things. That's as far as the writing process. As far as the marketing process for your book starts at least about 6 months before you finish the book, if not sooner. And I say that because I was told there's an 18-month cycle for marketing your book. 6 months before your book's finished, 6 months after your book is finished, 6 months after your book is published, because you want to keep generating interest in your book. And so the way you do that, you have to build a platform. Now, when I say platform, people are like, what do you mean by platform? Where a platform is a place where you can get people to follow you. For example, some people like to blog. Blogging is an excellent way for authors to get fans because people like to just read things on the internet. So they just read things on the internet. So, hey, Josh, what's Josh writing? The Nephilium. You know, and just start reading. That's how I did when I saw Disclosure. I was like, oh my gosh, Nephilium, I want to get, you know. But others, that's a good way to start blogging. And I use WordPress for my blog. Other people use eBlogger, I believe. And there's other different blogging sites that you can join to start generating fans. And don't necessarily, now people say, what do you write about? From my personal experience, I use my blogs around my show. My blog is surrounded by my show, so I have a show blog. I have debated on doing my own personal blog, but I don't know if I'm that interesting enough to do that. So I don't know, but there are other things I can talk about. But do what you know. Like a friend of mine, she is a stay-at-home mom who homeschools her kids, and her kids are autistic. So she talks about those type of issues. So if you want to blog about something that you know, or that you're pretty much interested in. Or if you want to connect with people, just let people get inside your brain. It could be a rant about some guy on the street, or it could be a show you saw, but get to blogging, so that's how you connect with your readers. Another form of marketing is like if you want to do a show, like I did a show, or a YouTube channel, like a couple authors I know, they do YouTube channels. You can do that. Others write articles, and articles are a good way to get followers too, because they can be found online, on the internet, and you can start to build readership because people start to follow you. That's some of the marketing things. And then when it comes to publishing, make sure you do your research about the publishing company that you're interested in looking at if you plan to go the traditional route. For the indie publishing, make sure you talk to other authors who have been there before. You can talk to fellow colleagues, you can talk to, or you just look online. Another thing too is to take advice. One thing that the indie author movement has done is that the internet is swamped with advice. There's everyone telling you how to do everything, from show, don't tell, to make sure you have to blog, make sure you do this, don't use these words, don't do that words. Find someone that you trust and then follow them that have good advice. And you may follow a couple of people, because I don't try to take every inch of advice that comes to me, for the simple fact that you'll get bombarded with it. Some person says do this, some person says do that. Pretty much kind of figure your own way out. That's my advice. Find figure your own way out, because not everything is carbon copy for every author. What else? And then I was trying to make it quick. And as far as after the publishing, when you start to get reviews, what I did, I stalked Amazon. Did I get a review yet? Did I get a review yet? And then when I got my review, one was like a bad, what I consider a negative review. And I'm like, oh, I can't ever write again. What am I doing here? What makes you think I can write? You know what? Negative reviews are part of life, just like negative things that happen to us are part of life. If it's a constructive negative review, take it, use what you can from it, and then move forward, because not everyone's going to hate your book, and not everyone's going to love your book. So people don't even care about your book, but just take it all in stride, because the fact is you should be thankful someone read your book that you maybe didn't know. And so that's something I learned, and I learned it the hard way, because the very first time I got a negative review, I was out of it for 4 days. 4 days, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I wanted to just throw my computer out the window so I could never write again. And then about a couple of days after that, I got a good review. Those are some of the tips I would give writers about their careers. And then just know that the path is littered with mistakes, whether it's your first book or your 10th. So just take it all in stride.
That's really good advice. That's awesome advice. That's advice I wish I had when I first started.
Yeah.
I can agree with all that, and I'll add too from my perspective through self-publishing and not in the nonfiction area. I would suggest starting off small, because when I first started, I wanted to do everything because I had the time. I have a disability, so I am at home all the time. This is all I do. So it's kind of worked in my favor. So sometimes disadvantages can be advantages. But I had nothing but time, so I wanted to fill that time with as much of just this as I could, writing and just whatever else. But luckily for me, God just through some things that came up and stuff, kind of showed me to kind of just take a breath, take it easy, just work on adding one thing at a time, and that's what I've been doing. I started off with the book. That was my first introduction to into this stuff, and shortly after that, I started doing radio interviews and looking around to see who would have me on. And that's also a big part of the networking that we were talking about before, because if you want to get on shows and stuff, it helps if the person knows you, because I can say from personal experience now, having my own shows, when you're a host of a show, you want to know the person that you're going to have on, or at least have a general idea of what they're talking about. So it helps if if you're an unknown author, or if this is your first book and you want to get on a show, it helps to just drop the host an email and just give a quick introduction about yourself, why you want to be on, what you hope to gain, that kind of stuff. So that's what I would suggest there. I definitely agree with blogging. That's something that I fought against for a while, because I just didn't want to do more writing after I wrote my book. But I realized blogging is a great way to get more readers and more people interested, because they can read your stuff for free. They can get a sense of your writing, who you are, the kind of things you write about, and they don't have to invest any money, and they don't have to invest that much time into it. What's good about blogging too is there's a lot of services out there like Google AdSense where you can actually make money on that, and just from people clicking on your blog. So there's areas there too, but more importantly, it does help kind of get your style out there, and it'll help attract the readers. For nonfiction, one thing that I made some mistakes early on with is getting pulled into debates. And if you're if you're, and I'm sure it comes up in fiction a lot too. If you're from my experience, if you're writing nonfiction, you have to understand that everybody goes into your book or into your writing with a preconceived idea. They have their own beliefs already. And if they don't know where they believe, on a certain area, like Rapture is an example I always go to, because that's always really debated. But if somebody's not sure, they usually have an idea at least of what they lean towards. So if you're writing something contrary to what other people believe, that's fine if it's biblically sound. But you got to do it in a way that people are going to challenge it, because for most people, the idea of changing beliefs, especially beliefs that we've held on to like our entire lives, let's say, it's a scary thing. I mean, there's a whole process with that, and it takes a lot of time to get into the right mindset. So if you are, especially if you're an unknown author, because I do write about some kind of controversial things in Disclosure that is not generally accepted in the majority of the traditional church. So the mistake that I made early on was I'd get pulled into debates because, I'd get a negative review or something, and then somebody would say, and usually it was because they didn't agree with my personal view of whatever topic they were writing about. So what I would do, and this was not the right way to handle it, I would engage, like I would take it, like I would be offended by it, like personally offended by it, because I wasn't seeing things from their perspective. I was only seeing it from mine. I would say, who does this person know? Who, what do they know any more than I? And so I would get online and not that it's wrong to respond, but in the way that I was responding, I was really defensive. So if you're going to be a nonfiction writer, you got to have a thick skin with this stuff, because you'll get pulled into all sorts of debates that can take days and days and days to get through, and you're never going to. If the person is going to be that offended where they're going to challenge you like that, you're not going to change their mind anyway. A lot of times, the best thing you can do is if you're going to reply, if you feel that it's right to reply, because some people just need to be ignored. But
Yeah.
if you're going to reply to them, just say, well, again, this is why I believe this, and give the Bible verses, whatever the case may be, your evidence. Make sure you have a strong case too, and tell them, if you can see where they're, even if you don't agree with it, if you can at least see where they're coming from, try to meet them halfway and say, well, I do see where you're coming from. I don't personally agree with it, but I do understand where you're coming from. I hope that this isn't going to be an issue that is going to cause more division in the church. I don't see any reason why we still can't be brothers and sisters in Christ. So don't let it become like a divisive issue. That last thing we need is more division in the church.
We already have that.
Exactly.
I
So
agree
from my That's awesome. Yeah, from my end, that's probably the best advice I could give. And then, just create space is good. I use create space, and they do take a small percentage, but for what you get, it's well worth it. You can set your own prices. You can even have them design the cover if you don't know a graphic artist. They have a free cover creator. I use that for disclosure. I'm not using that for my next book, but there's a lot of great tools there. There's promotional tools too, and a lot of it just takes it right out of your royalty. So, and then in just trying to get your name out there, you find like-minded Christians. Facebook has been huge for me. Friend requests. I know Facebook's been getting kind of touchy about that though, because when I first started, I friend requested everybody. Just random strangers and stuff that I thought might be interested in my book, and Facebook's kind of cracking down on that, so you'll have to be careful that you don't get your account
that's why
deleted.
the organizations are kind of helpful, because with the indie movement, the organizations come about with like-minded Christians, and then it's okay, because then you get to, as you interact with the groups and things of that nature, you get to know them. I think we met in a similar group. I can't remember what group it was now. Oh my gosh, but I can't remember. But we met, and I kind of knew you from that group, and then when I mentioned about the show, then we connected, because we already have a like-minded attitude toward things, so that kind of helps, and I guess I should have said that too with social media. Make sure you use social media wisely. That's one tip to use. I forgot to mention this, because you don't want to. Social media there is now able to embed posts that you have. And so someone can say, you could say something like 3 or 4 years ago, and they can embed it into something and put your stuff out there. So you have to be mindful what you put out there. Not saying you have to be closed mouth about your faith or anything like that, but do be mindful that not everyone's going to agree with you. And make sure that you use social media professionally. It's still a professional face. That's how I see social media, as professional face. But use it professionally as well, because don't cuss the people who don't like your book out. Don't look for the one reviewer who you can kind of figure out from Facebook. Go to their page and cuss them out. It doesn't work. You're the only one who's going to look bad, not the person you cussed out. And there have been people who have done that. If someone disagrees with your book, they disagree with it. Non-fiction or fiction, they disagree with it. Thank you so much for reading it. And you don't have to tell them that. You could just, okay, move on. Before I used to cry, like I said. So I do want to mention that. Make sure you use social media wisely, because it is like a digital fingerprint of your actions.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, everything is recorded on there, and anybody can bring it up.
Yeah.
I'll say, too, it's important to... I think in both nonfiction and fiction, it's important to have a unique perspective. And I know in my nonfiction stuff, there are those that will strive so much to have a unique perspective that they lack in biblical evidence, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
There are a lot out there. I mean, you can come up with anything, but you don't want to cherry pick verses or anything.
Yeah.
And I'm sure with fiction too, you want to have a unique enough idea that's still proclaiming truth. So yeah. I want to ask your opinion on this with fiction. What are some areas of Christian fiction that you feel are oversaturated, that maybe somebody probably wouldn't want to write about because it's just too much done? It's not unique enough.
Well, even though I write in Christian romance, I do think Christian romance is almost oversaturated with sweet love stories. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about like sweet and sensuality, but sweet is that, oh my gosh, guy meets girl, girl meets guy, a little small thing happens, they live happily ever after. And I think that's oversaturated. And another thing I mentioned was the Amish romances. I don't get it. I don't get it. And you look, it's everywhere, And when I saw the speculative Amish fiction came out, like Amish fiction, Amish vampires, Amish werewolves. I mean, there's a huge section of Amish stuff going on right now, and I think for Christian fiction that's oversaturated. With another thing that's oversaturated is the lack of multicultural characters. There's not a lot of multicultural characters in Christian, particularly in Christian romance at all. And it wasn't until I started to try to sell my book that I saw, and I hate to say this, how a lot of Christian big publishing houses frowned on multicultural characters in Christian romance. Pretty much Christian romance is white. I hate to say it like that, but that's what I see it as. And then if you have a multicultural character, it's sent to the shelf here, little tiny shelf, maybe 2 or 3 books of multicultural romance. Here's 3. And I think that bothered me a lot because I said, what is the color of Christian love? And that really bothered me a lot when I started. I said, are you serious? One particular traditional publisher, whom I will leave unnamed, just basically said, oh, we don't have much success with that. It wasn't even the book. We don't success with that.
Oh, jeez.
And I was thinking to myself, is it you don't have success with it because you don't promote it? Is that what it is? And it's very interesting because I just read an article recently where I think in 2050, most of the people in America are going to be biracial or multiracial, whatever you want to call it, mixed ethnicity or whatever.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that same post. Yeah, it was actually you that posted. Yeah, I saw that.
And I'm looking at 2050. That's not too far down the line. So it's just like for us, And I'm thinking to myself, so why is mainstream Christian romance in particular, which I love romance, especially Christian romance, why is it just white? And I think that's oversaturated. And I hope that with indie authors pushing the envelope on what makes Christian romance, I hope we kind of let these bigger traditional publishing houses know, hey, there is a market for this. You have to promote it. If you don't have success with it because you don't promote it. So that's the thing, is oversaturated. And I'm not being, what's the word I want to use, Josh? I'm not trying to be funny. It's just the truth.
Oh, yeah.
Up, so I will definitely think that's oversaturated. And then, what else? I think that's about it. That's it. My opinion.
I can say I definitely agree there, and that's why I remember that the post, your caption, "These people are beautiful!" Exclamation mark. I just love that.
And beautiful.
Yeah, and I agree. I think what a lot of that comes from, and I actually wrote a little bit about it in Disclosure because it's something that bothers me. It always has since I was a kid. There's this really traditional view. It's not as much out there, but it's still there, and I think that's where a lot of this stems from. There's this really traditional church, Christian view that is against interracial marriage, which that's not biblical. Interracial marriage is just fine. Moses, he had a Ethiopian wife. Moses was not Ethiopian.
Yeah, and no, he wasn't. I hate to break it to everybody. He had a beautiful dark-skinned wife, So
that's right. And so God doesn't have any issue with that. And I don't personally, I don't really know how that whole thing even got started, but it's not as prevalent now. It's generally getting more accepted, but there are still a lot of traditional churches and organizations that are still against it. I think that might be what part of the problem with some of the bigger publishers is, that they're still stuck in that mindset. That's why I wanted to write about that in Disclosure too, even though I was thinking, man, I don't know if this is really going to fit, but it's important. It needs to be said. There's just like you said, what color is Christian love? Yeah.
We're not talking about. When he was talking about strange women, he wasn't like in my book. The title of my book is Many Strange Women. When he was talking about that, he wasn't talking about ethnicity as much as the idolatrous ways they brought with them. He was talking about their worship and their gods. They were bringing gods that led King Solomon astray. They weren't talking about ethnicity. But if people say, "Well, stick to that when God said not to intermarry." I don't think he was talking, and you can correct me, Josh, you know, you're the scholar, not I, but I don't think he was talking about ethnicity, like don't mix because of ethnicity. He said don't mix because they are worshiping false gods and will taint you with their worship.
Yep,
Yeah.
you are absolutely right. You
I
are
want to make
absolutely
sure
right.
teacher, did I say that right? No,
Oh,
but
I'm far from that, but no, you're absolutely right. When you all you got to do is read the text, and yeah, it's not it has nothing to do with race
hmm
because God it was a faith thing.
yeah,
God didn't want the Israel was just surrounded by nations that worship false gods. I mean, they still are,
yeah,
and God didn't want his children mixing with that because, well, you don't want another Tower of Babel incident, where everybody's in rebellion against God.
yeah.
Um, it had nothing to do with ethnicity, and the proof text for that, I don't remember the verse off the top of my head, but it's in Deuteronomy or Leviticus. But
hmm
God gave provisions for how somebody from another country could come in and take part in like Passover. I mean, that's one of their most uh, holy feast, celebration thing, whatever you want to call it, ever,
hmm
Passover. And God gave provisions on how somebody from another country, a sojourner, could come in and take part in that and actually become part of the nation, become as a native, as it
Yeah,
says. And all it was, they had to be circumcised, because that was what it was back then.
yeah,
But that's how they professed their faith in God and Yahweh,
yeah,
the God of Israel, was through that. And if somebody was willing to do that, then they were children of gods. And we have the same thing nowadays. You submit your life to Jesus. It has no bearing on race or anything like that. It's the same whatever country you go to. If you want to be a Christian, if you want to go to heaven, you put your faith in Jesus.
yeah.
There's no
And it's not a major ethnicity, and that's why I think that part of Christian fiction is oversaturated of one particular ethnicity, which tends to be mostly Caucasian male or Caucasian female, and even within that subset is usually some blonde girl with blue eyes or whatever, and a tall, dark, and handsome guy, And I'm thinking to myself, I remember when that is when it really came to me that how oversaturated it is, and that we really need to ask our Christian traditional publishing houses, look, you got to come out not the dark ages, but you got to come out this mindset that you cannot promote anything but what you have been promoting. There is a market for it, and with the indie movements, they're telling us, hey, guess what? There is a market for it. Because when my publisher took on my book, I was shocked. I was so happy to finally have a publisher. But they just said, oh, this is a great book. That's what they said. It didn't matter what they look like. And I have an interracial couple in my book, but it didn't matter what they look like. And I think that is oversaturated. Hopefully we can prayerfully ask our traditional publishing house to say, hey, there is a market for multicultural fiction. More than you know.
very, very, very true, and that's something that we should, I'll keep in prayer too, that they'll get a little bit more open-minded about that, because there's nothing biblically wrong with it anyway.
No, no, there is. No, there is. He made all of us.
Yeah. So we talked about what areas are oversaturated. What areas do you think can be developed more?
Now, this is an area that I'm so glad you asked me, because one of the areas that can be developed more is Christian speculative fiction. And for those of us who don't know what speculative fiction is, the genres are like sci-fi, horror, mystery, and then subgenres like steampunk, time travel, stuff like that. So these are the what-if genres. What if this happens? Or what if man created artificial intelligence that try to take over man? And you may say, well, that sounds like Terminator, basically with Skynet and Cyberdyne systems and all that. We all pretty much know what that. But Christian speculative fiction is an area that needs a lot of development. But it's so hard for some Christians to read it because they don't like those what-if questions. And speculative fiction really probes those what-if questions. One of the things that I am fascinated with is the theory of the multiverse. Now, there is no biblical, as far as I know, Josh, there's no biblical evidence for the multiverse. And I don't particularly agree with that. But it's a what if. What if God did create multiverses? Okay, it's fiction. Everyone, calm down. Don't get excited. But for some people, they can't handle that type of thing. You know, they can't handle the what if. And I know that if I get to heaven and God says, you know, there's no multiverses, I think I'm going to be okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It'd be more exciting to see the Lord than the multiverse. Get me. But some people, they don't like those kind of questions. Another thing with my Iron Sharpening Iron group is that some of the Christians write paranormal. Paranormal? You can't write Christian paranormal. I'm telling you that you can. But you have to make sure that we're not trying to, first of all, undermine the Bible. We're not trying to say the Bible is not relevant. What we're doing is using creative ways to bring about things. There have been Christian vampire stories, like I mentioned earlier, Christian zombie stories, Christian werewolf, and this one guy even ghost story, and that's like a big no-no. Someone's like, you can't do that. I said, why don't you read it first and see what kind of message you're trying to bring out? Even the Nephilim, and I'm saying the word wrong. I know I am. I know I'm saying Nephilim wrong because this one of the guys, he's a Jewish guy who believes Jesus Christ is the Messiah. He was like, "You're saying it wrong," and I said, "I'm sorry." He told me how to say it right, but I can't remember. But anyway,
I mean, I don't. You know, obviously, I don't take offense about. You know, I don't.
But he let me know I said Nephilim wrong. I'm like, well, this is what's going to be for right now. So anyway,
yeah, it's fine. Some people say, you know, Nephilim or Nephilim.
Okay, it's Nephilim. Sorry, I don't know. But anyway, but with Christian speculative fiction, we probe those kind of questions because they may attract people. Even like with magic, like some Christians write about magic, and one of my authors who was on a show, his whole book has magic in it, but he was very careful to first have biblical standpoints. He actually had very determined boundaries about magic. Others have used magic in different ways. So these speculative fiction writers, they are sorely under the area for Christian speculative fiction is undeveloped. And a lot of Christians don't want to even deal with it. They're like, we can't have Christian ghost stories. You can't have Christian vampire stories. Why not try to find out what we're trying to do first? Instead of knocking it, trying to find out what it is, you know. For myself, I like horror. And someone say, oh, a Christian horror story? You mean you like to see people's head stumps get caught with blood gushing from the stump and all that? No. But it's using this genre and then putting it in such a way that still brings about a Christian message. If anything, that tells me that the author is pretty good at what he knows how to do. One show I did, I don't know if you remember, Josh, but I did a show called Multiverses, Magic Potions, and the Cross, where we talked about Christian speculative fiction and how we need more people on it, but people, in general, Christians don't want to ask those what-if questions. And personally speaking, as the person who likes speculative fiction, you're looking at a girl who grew up with Star Trek, so asking those what-if questions, I think it's an honor because God gives us this hungering for knowledge. None of us are saying everything that we write is true. I don't believe there are Christian vampires or anything like that, but I'm just saying we can still use this genre to bring someone who may not read a Christian romance book, but they may read vampire books, you know. They may not read soft, sweet romance. They may be paranormal, and you can still use these avenues to bring about the message of Christ. But one thing we do with our group, we don't undermine the Bible by any means. We don't try to take certain passages and twist them. And we always are very prayerful about what we do. So that's the area that needs to be developed is Christian speculative fiction. And I think more sound doctrine needs to be developed because right now, like you mentioned earlier, prosperity, health, and wellness is rampant, and not just here in the West, but over in Africa, where people are doing some crazy things because of that. There was one, I think I showed you, Josh, did I tell you about that one, where this guy who's in, I don't know, some part of Africa, I can't remember, and he was going to walk on water.
Oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah, I think he did.
Let me just tell you, he didn't make it. He was going to walk on water, and I hate the fact that I'm laughing. Lord forgive me, but he got out the boat and just sank, and they couldn't find him. And just to get across the river was like 20 minutes by boat, and he was going to walk on water. Another guy, unfortunately, he had all this faith, and he walked into a lion's den.
Oh, wow.
He did not come back out. Like, yeah. And the zookeeper's like, you can't go in, don't go in there. And he believed, and he wore a red robe and walked into the lion's pit. They said he was gone in 5 seconds. And see, that's what I'm saying. That's why we need more books about sound doctrine. And people say, just have enough faith, just have enough faith. No, that God doesn't say just have enough faith. He said, trust in me. He doesn't say have enough faith. Like faith is this magical power that you can hold in your hand that can make, anyway, you know more of that than I do, Josh, but we do need books on more sound doctrine and more books about convicting us of our sins, because we want to kind of sweep things away under the rug, because we know God forgives us. But I think in saying that God forgives us, we think it's just a get out of jail free card. I know I sinned. That's okay. God forgive me. Oh, I'll do it again. It's okay. God forgive me. And we need to be more accountable for our actions. So to sum that up, the areas that could be more developed is more books on sound doctrine, and for the fictional side, books about speculative fiction within certain constructs of biblical principles.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree with with all of it, but with what you were saying about more about conviction of sin. That's a huge one, because that's a hot button for a lot of Christians, especially some more traditional ones, and because that's something that I touched on in disclosure, and that's another thing that if you're gonna write a nonfiction or something like me or some of the other researchers, and you got to expect too that people are gonna, if they don't like what you're saying, they're gonna twist it to like the worst thing you could possibly say. Like I said something in disclosure about something along the lines of, hey, maybe we should just follow God's laws, or something like that. God has a lot of stuff in the Old Testament we should pay attention to, and sin is defined for us, what's right and what's wrong, and it goes beyond just the Ten Commandments. And I can't even I didn't expect just. I mean, all of a sudden people are saying I'm preaching works salvation, which I would never do.
No.
I mean, we would all be damned to hell if that were the case. I'm not going to preach that. Like, no, you find it's not a, you can't add to or take away from your salvation with sin or works.
Yes.
It doesn't work that way.
Right.
But that's just an example of something that I wrote about, and in the first draft of my book, I'll say to you that's something that's good about Create Space is if you put a book out and you realize later on that there's something that needs some more clarity, with Create Space it's really easy. You add it in and it
automatically
reloads
updates.
It saves everything for you. It only takes maybe a day or two, and then it's back up for sale. Because I had to do that the first run of my book Disclosure. I wasn't really clear when I was talking about the version of the once saved always saved doctrine that says you just repeat a prearranged prayer and it doesn't matter if you believe it or not.
Right.
The first run of the book, that's what I was talking about, but people got the impression that I was talking about all once saved, always saved doctrine, and I wasn't. There's just that version of it that's been twisted. You have to have belief. I am once saved, always saved. I definitely believe that. I have no problem with the salvation prayer that people will go through. It's just if a person is going to say that prayer and not have the belief in their heart and then expect that it's like just magically going to get them into heaven because they said it, that's not going to do anything for them. And I was mainly talking about that and like prosperity preaching, and because that's
like fire insurance.
Exactly.
And that's why books like yours are so needed, because one of the things I think reason why the prosperity message is so rampant is because it appeals to our sense of wanting to have God on a buffet. I want this part of God, not this part of God. I want this part of God, not this part of God. And we would like to have God on a buffet, and God's not like that. And one thing I've always told different people is like, if we wouldn't treat each other that way, why do we think it's okay to treat God that way? Because we tend to tell people, this is who I am, you just have to accept it. We're very good at saying, this is who I am. I just have to be me. I got to tell it like it is. And you don't like how I am, we do all that, Why would it be any different for God?
Exactly.
Why would it be any different? And so that's why we need more books on sound doctrine, because some people are lost and then they walk away from the faith disillusioned because they didn't get that prosperity. They're still sick. They're not wealthy. oh my goodness, I'm in the same boat right now. If I really believe in God, that God was supposed to give me that, and I have this. I think I told about this tendonitis. If I could just show you my tendonitis, this has been
Ooh,
on for almost a
ouch.
while now. And if God was a God of prosperity, health, and wealth, then I will leave Him because I should be healed by now, right? I have
Mhm.
enough faith. But thank God that He is not like that. Just something I have to deal with until He's ready to heal me. He's been healing me, so. But that's why we need more books on sound doctrine.
That's awesome, and yeah, I agree there too, because like I mentioned before, and it's funny. God's been bringing up more opportunities for me to talk about it, which is interesting. But
Mm-hmm.
I have a disability. It's called Trevor's disease. It's a degenerative bone disease, and
Mm-hmm.
I am the type of Christian. I do believe generally in healing. I do believe that God can heal people miraculously just like that if he chooses to, or if he wants to. Or I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I know I haven't been healed like that, but I don't rest my faith on that. I rest my faith
Right.
on Jesus, and I know that if my body's not healed now, I know it's going to be someday. At least at the resurrection. But more importantly than that, I know that I've been healed. My heart's been healed. My
Mm-hmm.
spirit. I get to spend eternity with Jesus because of what He did on the cross. That's
Right.
that's the healing that I know I have. Whether my bone disease ever gets healed or not, I don't know. People have prayed for me, and I have faith that if I woke up tomorrow and it was gone, praise Jesus, it's gone.
Amen.
That's awesome.
Amen.
And
Exactly.
yeah, and if I wake up tomorrow and it's still there, praise Jesus anyway, because I'm still alive. I'm still saved. I still
Mm-hmm.
get to uh, do the stuff that He put me on the earth to do, and I actually love it, which I didn't expect going into it that I'd love it this much.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a funny side note. I think that was really interesting. You brought up the multiverse idea because it's actually kind of touches on what my next book is about, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
writing nonfiction, and
Mm-hmm.
what I think is cool about this fringe Christian. I think that's kind of the term we've been given, fringe Christian community, is you can be a little speculative. I mean, you have to have biblical backing for
Yeah.
if you're gonna put something out there. You got to be able to show why you see it there. But
Mm-hmm.
one in one of my blogs, I wrote about Ephesians and how it says, and I had talked a little bit with you about this on your show, how it says that from where Jesus is, he sees us already seated with Him. So
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, we're already there, and
Yes.
it goes into this whole thing with time and even the whole parallel dimension idea, which
Mm-hmm.
that well. I'll touch on that in a minute, but it gets into all areas of that. Like, how could that work? How am I here and in heaven after after the judgment, after everything's already been done? How can I be in both places? And
Mm-hmm.
and it even says in the text that when it says from the moment you were saved, you were already seated with Him. So
Yes.
when you received Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Jesus saw you seated with Him at that instant. It was the same, and from Jesus' perspective, it's the same instant Paul got saved, the
Mm-hmm.
same instant I got saved. We're not separated by time and space from Jesus' perspective. I just think that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
it's a mind blowing thing, and our God is bigger than we know. There was a guy I had on my show. He said He's bigger than you know, and he kind of talks about this change that happens when we get saved. He said it's that we're not human anymore. We're more like Christ, and it was really interesting how he did it. And he said so. In order for us to even see Christ, we can't be just human anymore. And he said, but we can't be, we're human here, but now when we get saved, it's like we have a piece of Christ's nature. It was really interesting. I may be saying it wrong, not something weird. I'm saying it wrong, but he was just really profound in this thing. We don't really quite understand it because God's bigger than we know. If we could put Him in a box, He wouldn't be God. And God is so vast, so knowledgeable that for me, if the multiverse existed, I would still give praise and glory to God. There's a theological
Yes,
construct for that, but the Bible doesn't talk about that, so I kind of take it like, okay, whatever. But I'm not gonna lose sleep and find out it is one. I would say all praise be
exactly.
to God. But there are some Christians when they're posed to those kind of things, like, oh, it scares them. I said it shouldn't. It really shouldn't, because God's bigger than you know. Then if this is just one possible reality, He's still God of all of them. So that's
Yeah,
how I see it. But like I said, I
yeah.
don't. It's a grain of salt. If I'm wrong, oh my gosh, I would still be okay. I'm not gonna be upset about if I'm wrong or not. But it's
Exactly.
just, that's why it's the best time for Christian writers to kind of probe these type of things. And with the indie movement, that's why it's a great time to be an author, to see, you know what, God is God of all,
That's
and how
right.
can I show Him that?
That's right. Yeah, that's so true. And God is. What kind of blows my mind too is God is infinite, yet He dwells in us.
Yes.
Oh wow. But what I think is interesting, we need to take stock of what we put our faith in. Most Christians will say they put their faith in Jesus, but look how easy it is for the enemy to sow seeds of doubt. One scientific discovery, and a lot of Christians have their heads, they're scratching their heads trying to figure it out. And the reason I bring that up is, my next book is actually tackling that stuff. You can actually reconcile modern physics and the Bible. They fit hand in hand. Yeah, and it's amazing. But everything with quantum mechanics and string theory and all these, big terms and really advanced ideas. They do fit right in with creation, with the Bible. The fourth temporal dimension of time clearly fits in there. The fourth spatial dimension fits in there.
Yeah.
It can all fit. Now, as far as parallel dimensions, if there's infinite numbers of us, I don't think so, because for me, for that to happen, the universe would have to be infinite, and I don't believe it is, because
exactly.
It's spreading. So if it's spreading, it can't be infinite. It wouldn't be spreading. But it also it also says in the Bible God stretches out the heavens and all this. So it's finite. It can't be infinite. So I don't see I don't think that there's an infinite number of myselves out there.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But it's nice to say, okay, whether or not it isn't or is, what can we do to still show there's a God is still the God.
Yeah.
That's my biggest thing. It's I've said, it's one guy got really upset with me, and I said, why are you upset? It's fiction. Calm down. It's make believe. It's okay. I mean, calm down. It's okay. I don't really believe that, but at the same time, I don't mind writing about it.
Exactly. It's an interesting idea, and it makes for a good story, because what if, God is infinite. What if there are infinite multiverse? What if there are infinite? There's a theory that I'm writing about right now. These physicists have ideas that we're all on these brains, these membrane-like things, and each one has a universe and so on and so forth.
Oh yeah, I've heard that one too.
Yeah, and there could be infinite of those. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. That could be. If there is, it doesn't shake my faith at all, because I don't really see it conflicting too much. It just means that God's creation is more vast than I thought it was.
Yeah. What a shock,
Exactly. It doesn't. The only thing that it could change is a traditional belief or a traditional interpretation of Bible verses. So in my next book, I'm really trying to show that, physics, a lot of it's theoretical anyway. When we get into these really weird things, I mean, string theory, there isn't a shred of evidence for it, but it's theoretical, and it's interesting, and it very well could be that.
It's based on mathematics too, because mathematics can make any. I'm saying I'm kind of off tangent, but mathematics can show things imaginary, but doesn't have any physical proof of that.
Exactly.
A lot of that is off mathematics. So 2 + 2 is 4, but 2 + 2 + 2 is, you can't hold it in your hand.
That's
it
right.
helps you explain certain concepts. That's
Exactly.
even with the theoretical physics. It helps. The fact that some equations in the universe that we know can be put down to a small sheet of paper. It's actually quite brilliant. It shows how big our God is. That, oh my gosh, if we did E = mc², we understand something when it says that. So it's mathematics showing us a not concrete concept of the universe. So, but yeah, sorry, we kind of went off track. That's my topic, Josh. That is my topic. I could talk space all day long. So I know we're supposed to be talking about other things.
Oh, that's okay. My listeners are used to that. We go. I think just about every guest I've had, we've gone off on tangents here and there, and it's fun. And I'm the same way. I could talk about that all night too.
Oh yeah.
But we probably should get back on topic.
Yeah, probably.
As much as I'd love to keep talking about this, but let's see. What do I have next here? What are some negative connotations of Christian fiction? We've kind of gotten into that a
Mhm.
little bit, but from your end of things, what do you see is some more like negative connotations that people might have in their minds that might deter them from wanting to write Christian fiction, or what are just some of those ideas that are out there?
Some of the ideas is that Christian fiction is boring. They already know what's going to happen, and that is whitewash. You're going to be having Bible verses thrown at you, fire and brimstone, some preacher, Jesus is going to walk across the scene and he's going to do this, or the angels are going to come down. That's some connotation, negative connotation of Christian fiction, because we assume that we know what it's going to talk about. Because especially in the West, due to the Christian culture, we think we know about God. We think we understand him, therefore this is what Christian fiction is. Some other negative connotations with Christian fiction, and this is a biggie for me, because I like romance, and I read secular, so reading Christian romance, when I first started reading it, I was fine, but then I remember wanting to see more tension between the man and the female in the book. And I'll never forget, Josh, I read this one romance, this Christian romance, it's sweet, and there was no chemistry between the two main characters, and it bothered me because there was a page and a half of this guy talking about holding her hand, 4 or 5 paragraphs of him holding her hand, and then on page 398 of 400 he kissed her. That was it. One kiss in the whole book, and it was the one line, he kissed her. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is 400 pages later, he kisses her. Now the book's over with. And I remember thinking, this is the most boring book I've ever read in my life, and people are like, oh, this is such an excellent book. I said, no, it isn't. Some people, for me personally, I wanted something to show chemistry because, sexual feelings and tensions are part of relationship between men and women in the first place. And I wanted to be able to connect with it. I didn't need to know the graphic stuff, no. But I at least like to know that. And so sometimes, and I say that because there are people who like eroticism. There's a lot of Christians who read erotica. And they read erotica for that one reason, because they like to see the sexual tension between them. So we have Christian fiction that shows the sexual tension without having to be graphic. I mean, we're taking care of some things. Like one lady who read my book, she said, I thought I would miss the sex and I didn't. She said in her review. And of course, that made me feel good. Like, oh my gosh, I did a good job. So, and so that's one thing, is that'll be boring, that'll be tasteless, no emotion, no chemistry. They won't talk about topics that we need to hear, all this kind of stuff. So that's some of the negative connotations of Christian fiction, which is what we talked about earlier. Areas to be developed: edgy Christian romances, speculative fiction, multicultural views of fiction, sound doctrine. Those are the things why. And we can still intermix all that in our books. So that's why I want to mention some of the positive areas to be developed. So when we talk about the negative connotations, if we have people in the audience listening or viewers watching, hey, God may be calling you to do this. Now, I don't think, personally, this is one thing, Josh. There are some Christian writers that I know who are putting sexual scenes in books, not just a behind closed door. And I really disagree with that, because I don't believe that adds to the story. I don't mind showing tension or chemistry, but the act itself, I don't see why we have to be privy to that. Even if it's like a wayward character who's like falling into sin, we don't need to know graphically what's going on. And I really wholeheartedly stand by that assessment. You can have the tension in there, but I don't think you need to have the graphic sex scene in there. But there are some Christian authors doing that. When it comes to that, I have to say that their writing is judged by God, because he gave them the gift. So in all honesty, that's between them and God. But for me, I would never do that, because I know God called me to a higher calling. And if someone can enjoy my book without having to have all that, I think God gets the glory, not that. But that's just one thing that I disagree with negatively, where they're trying to push the envelope too much, saying, hey, I'm trying to reach the lost, I'm trying to reach the lost. Well, if you're using Satan's pens to write the book, how are you reaching a loss, Right. And I'm all for chemistry and tension, especially with romance, but I'd rather read that instead of erotica that a lot of Christians are reading. It's not like when 50 Shades of Grey did not get big because non-Christians were reading it, okay?
Right.
A lot of Christians who were reading that book. And so that's why those negative connotations of Christian fictions may lead even Christians not to read Christian fiction. Mm-hmm. So that's why I wanted to mention oversaturated areas and areas of development. So when we talk about this part, someone in the audience may answer the call.
Absolutely. Something that you said that you're actually working on a series, and I mean, I've tried writing fiction before, and it was a very, very short fiction, and that was incredibly difficult. I can't even imagine writing a whole series. What advice would you give for writers who are considering writing a series?
Well, writing a series is a good thing. A lot of new authors are doing that. They're writing a series to gain a following. Just like when you blog or do your shows or do anything else, you're gaining a following. So if your series is good, they want to go, oh, what's going to happen next? Like with this, one of the coolest, and this is the cool part of being a writer, when you look at some of the reviews, someone says, I can't wait to read book 2. And you're like, oh my gosh, so what happened? You already reeled them in with your first book. Now you're going to reel them in with your second, third, fourth, or fifth. I personally would recommend 3-book series, unless you're writing fantasy. You may want like 5 or 6 books. Some secular authors have like maybe 11 in the series, but it's what you want to do if you're in fantasy or something. 11 in a series or something like that. But series are a good way to hook more fans. And then what will happen, let's say the person may not have read your first book, they read your second book. Then they want to read your first book. Like, oh my gosh, this was good. What about the first book? And that draws more readers too. Also, some things that writers are doing for their series, they're making the first book free. So the person can download the first book for free, especially on Kindle or Nook. And then they make, oh no, just on Kindle. I don't think Nook has it. And then they make the second book, let's say $2.99, and the third book $3.99 or whatever. And so that helps to generate sales too. So you want to think about your pricing when you do series. And also make sure that your series, depending on what type of series that you're doing, make sure the continuity is still there. Whether the continuity is with the characters themselves or with the plot line. Like in my book, there's a certain plot line going on because in my book I have a cult in my book. And people have hated my cult, which I love. They hate my cult, and I love it. But this cult is a continuing theme throughout the books. So you read about it in the first book and the second book and the third book, but there are separate stories. So that's something to think about when you write series too. And like I said, if you're a new author, a lot of authors are doing that. For indie authors, especially, they're starting series. From a traditional standpoint, some publishers don't want to do series because they got to put in all this work to keep interest in it. They may want single titles, but you can still have single titles that still connect. Not just to see they still connect or something. So that's something you want to think about when you're writing series.
Good deal. Yeah, there are some there are some in the nonfiction side of things that'll contain their book in series. And at first I was going to do that with Disclosure. I was going to make Disclosure a 3-part series. Turned out to not be that, and I should have. Because I remember right when Disclosure came out, when I started doing radio shows, I probably even said on your show that I was gonna make Disclosure into a 3-part series. And I should have put more prayer into that before I.
Right. What the Lord says first. How's that? Right.
Exactly, because he had different ideas. The book that I'm working on now, I wouldn't consider it as Disclosure Part 2 at all, but just because it's my writing, it's my style, it's my book that does connect, but it's a different book altogether. Disclosure is just a standalone book. So I would say if in nonfiction, if you're considering writing a series in nonfiction, it is a really good way to go because a lot of authors have had a lot of success doing that, or even having a common theme. Like I just had by the time this show will air, the week before that will have been my show with Dr. Ken Johnson, and all of his books he has the word ancient in the title, even something as small as that. It'll be like Ancient Prophecies Revealed or Ancient Church Fathers, and it really kind of helps bring these books together in a thread. And his books aren't like necessarily in a series, but just based on that style and the way he goes about it, they all do kind of connect, and it's awesome. It's worked well for him. So there are ways that you can make it. You can have threads like that to make it connect. And I'm sure I'll have something like that in my next book. I don't know what it is, but like I was saying, if you're going to work on nonfiction and you're thinking about doing a series, make sure you know what the series is before you release your first book, or before you start saying that it's going to be a series. Because I released Disclosure, I figured I would just figure out what a second and third book would be, but I had no idea. I didn't know what. I just that's what I wanted to do, and I started talking about it too early. So I would say, make sure it's what God wants you to do, and make sure you know what the second and third book, what they're going to be about before you start talking about them. So
yes, exactly.
If I think we're about closing up here. I could talk about this stuff all day. This is one of my favorite shows. This is one of my favorite shows that I'm not to say, I mean, all the shows I do are a blessing, but
I know what you mean.
I love this topic. I love talking to somebody as like-minded as yourself, and somebody that I know is practically right down the road. We don't live that far from each other.
Yeah, even. For sure. We should like meet up sometime, Josh. And go, oh, you're in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I live in Howell. You live in the Detroit area, I believe.
Yeah, that's like a 2-hour drive?
Something like that. Yeah, it's not too far. Yeah, and it's good to see that too, because there's not a whole lot of people in this field that are in this area of the country. They're usually on the West Coast.
Yeah.
We have there's you, me, Jim Wilhelmsen lives not too far. He lives an hour or two away. So it's always good to see a fellow Michigander into this stuff.
Michigan.
Absolutely. So if you had to boil it down, what would be the one thing that you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from this show?
If God has called you to write in whatever genre it is, use the gift that God gave you for His glory. He will give you the tools. He will give you the strength. He will give you the fortitude. He will give you the power. But it's a gift that He gave to you, and you should use it for His glory. I am sometimes tempted every once in a while not to write for God, and I don't feel bad for saying that, because sometimes it's true, especially when you see, let's say, like a book doing better than your own, and you want to say, wow, if I would just put, let's say, because I wrote romance, I'll just say, if I put graphic sex in my book, it'll sell too. But I will never write anything my mother couldn't read, and I will never write anything my Lord would be displeased with. And His approval is more important than man's.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that's something every author struggles with, or comes up against sometimes. I know I do with nonfiction writing. I've been tempted to write to what is selling or what is popular instead of what I believe that the Bible is saying, and I haven't done that. But those temptations do come up, and you might think, well, maybe my book will sell better if I talked about this or that. Because there are, and I think that for me, that's why disclosure was such a good teaching tool, because there's so much, there's enough. There's solid doctrine in there. I don't believe that there's anything in there that's necessarily like wrong. I mean, there's speculative stuff, sure, but there is a lot that there is some stuff in there that's controversial, and I get that. I expected that. Yeah. And when I was writing it and putting it together, I remember thinking people aren't gonna really like this. Like one thing that I've been talking a little bit more recently, but. In the book, I wanted to address the whole rapture idea, but I didn't necessarily want to make it something to cause division or to because I'm pre-trib. I just am, And I know lately that isn't really a popular view. The pre-wrath thing is getting really big. Yeah. And I remember when I was writing Disclosure, I almost left out what my personal view is, because I'm thinking, well, I don't want to alienate pre-wrath people or mid-trib, post-trib, no trib, whatever. I don't want to alienate anybody. But then I thought, well, if I don't put it out there, I mean, people are going to ask anyway. I shouldn't be ashamed of it. It's nothing that I feel it's right. I feel it's biblical. I could be wrong. I'm fully. I get that. I understand the arguments from all sides of the rapture debate. I studied it for years because I tortured myself with it, wondering what the truth is. And I still don't know. I lean towards pre because. I think it's the safer way to go. It puts that eminence in our lives that Jesus could be taking us up at any time, and really we should have that eminence anyway because we could die at any time.
Yeah.
So it just kind of helps solidify that. But I don't think anybody really knows for sure. But I'm going off on a tangent with that. But I'll say with writing your book, your nonfiction book, if that's what you're into, don't be afraid to write something that's not popular as long as it's biblically sound. You got to show that it's biblically sound, and if it's just an idea or just something that it's okay to write about that too, but just make sure that you specify, I know this is extremely speculative. Like in Disclosure, I talked about Ezekiel's vision, and I've completely changed my mind on that, by the way. And I even said in the book, I said it's very possible I'm going to change my mind on this someday. This is what I think it means now, but it's really speculative. I could be completely wrong. And I look back on that now, and I think, I think I might have been a little. I'm thinking differently about it now. There's still a possibility that could have been the right interpretation, but I kind of think there's other ways to look at it. So, be confident and absolutely let God lead you, and make sure it glorifies God, not yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you got to put first. And I love that you said that. I completely agree there. Well, if people want to know more about you or order your books, where can they go to do that?
Well, they can go to my website. It's very simple, parkerjcole.com. Pretty much you have my shows on there, archives of my shows, my current releases, my work in progress, because I always like to let my readers know I am still working on other things. You can see pictures of my family and my baby, who's my dog, and my hubby, and just kind of get to know about me. I am active on Facebook. You can hit me on Facebook. I have an author page and a personal profile, so you can hit me on either one. I will respond to you. If a fellow author is in the audience and they want to be on my show, they certainly can. You can just email me at writestuffradio@gmail.com, and that's WRITESTUFF radio@gmail.com, and I'd be love to showcase you on the show. Just letting you know, there is certain criteria. You have to have a certain, just generally accepted Christian things about God and things of that nature. Now, I don't mind if you're off the tangent on some non-essential things or things of that nature, but I'm not going to have people who believe Jesus is an alien on the show. Like I said, it might not be right for you to be on the show, but just contact me and we'll talk about having you on the show.
Fantastic. That's awesome. I love how open you are to keep in contact with people. I try to do that too. I think that's actually turned into a big part of my ministry is staying open to people who want to communicate and talk. I think that's great that you do that.
Oh yeah. Oh, I should probably mention one thing, Josh. For writers, once you finish your book, you write your book, get it published, you get readers. Keep in contact with your readers. You want them to continue writing. They're the ones who are going to buy your book. They're the ones who are going to be your fans. Like the one girl who read my book before it even published, I'll never forget. She says, "When is book 2 coming out?" She said. And I said, I'm working on it. And then she hit me up next week, when is book 2 coming out? She was like, and so what I constantly do is when I see her on Facebook, I say, hey, how are you? You want to keep in contact with your readers, because without readers, you wouldn't tell stories.
That's right. Absolutely right. And I'd say the same for the nonfiction side as well. Be prepared to get a few crazies if you see something in all caps. That's kind of, I don't know what it is about the all caps, but that's an almost definite sign that
someone's not happy with what you're saying.
It's not worth listening to, because I mean, a lot of times these people will say, I'm a prophet of God that's going to be glorified, and it's in all caps. It's like their language. So be prepared for some of that. That happens. It's okay to ignore those. I generally don't give those too much of my time, because it's not edifying, it's not fruitful. But do keep in contact with the people that want to, they want to talk, or they want to know more, or they have questions. And I've said so on the show before, and I'll mention it again. If anybody out there has any questions or wants to talk to me, this is all I do. I don't have a job that I have to go to, so I do have time to get to your emails and Facebook messages and whatever. So by all means, email me, talk to me. I'll see if and if I don't know an answer, I'll say I don't know. I think that's another big piece of advice for
Yeah, it's
upcoming
okay if you
authors.
don't know.
Exactly. Especially if you're writing in nonfiction, you got to get comfortable with the phrase "I don't know," and it's hard. It's really hard to say that because it's easier to try to come up with an answer on the spot.
Mhm.
It doesn't seem like it would be, but it's easier to say that than to swallow your pride and just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so learn how to say that. Yeah, and keep open to your readers. Um, I think I had one other. Oh, what is your radio show for people that want to check that out? Because I want people to go to your show too. For people who are interested, what is your show about, and where do they go to listen? Is it strictly internet? Can they tune in on their cars on their radio, or how does that work?
Well, I have actually two shows. The first show is on Tuesdays from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's called The Right Stuff, and that's where I showcase Christian fiction, nonfiction authors, as well as provide writers with tips, tools, techniques, and resources for them to hone their craft. My weekend show is called The Parker J. Cole Show, and that's where I talk with Christians about the church, in the church, and around the church, just issues about different things. That show is from Saturdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. That show is more new than my Right Stuff show. Basically, the followers from the Right Stuff just follow me to Parker J. Cole. And I really am starting to really enjoy that show because we're not just limited to just writing. We're talking to Christians from all different faith walks, talking about things like you were on the show talk the gospel harmony. We had a girl Saturday talk about Christians and persecution, the bully in the pulpit, about spiritual abuse, stuff like that. So I'm really enjoying that show. So we really probe these topics about the church and things of that nature. So if you want to get a hold of me, you can. And you can download the WLUV Radio mobile app to listen to my show on the go wherever you're at. So just go to the Google Play Store or the iTunes Store and look for WLUV Radio app. And then we're also on iHeart Detroit. My past shows are on there, and then on the WLUV Radio Network on YouTube, you can hear some of my shows there.
Fantastic. For people in the Detroit area, can they tune in, or is it strictly internet?
It's strictly cyber broadcasting. It's strictly cyber broadcasting. That is an option coming up, I think. So I think that's an option coming up. I'm not sure when, but that is an option. But right now we're keeping it just with cyber broadcasting because you can reach a lot of people via cyber broadcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. Good deal. Well, we'll definitely, I encourage our listeners to keep you in prayer with all that and all your upcoming projects too. Well, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to?
I couldn't tell you, but let me tell you, Josh, I had such a great time being on your show today. It's been just great to talk about this topic of writing, Christian writers, where we all fit in, how they can help. And if I missed something and you need some more questions or if I can help you, just email me at that email, rightstuffradio@gmail.com. I'll be sure to get back with you.
Absolutely, and same here. If you have questions from the nonfiction self-publishing side of things or whatever, my email is joshpeckdisclosure@gmail.com. Feel free to write me. I've gotten people that have already had questions about that, so I'm used to answering them.
Oh yeah.
All right. Fantastic. Well, I think we are all just about all out of time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us some inside information on writing and publishing and the whole process. This has been one of the most fun shows I've done so far, so I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Josh, for having me on. It's been great.
Absolutely. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Keep me updated on upcoming projects, and maybe we'll do a sci-fi episode sometime.
Oh, that'd be so awesome, Josh. I would love to do that. Just let me know when, right?
Absolutely. That would be great. Good deal. All right. Well, again, that was Parker J. Cole, host of The Parker J. Cole Show and author of numerous Christian fiction books. If you'd like more information, I'd highly suggest checking out her show. We went through the information there. It's very well done, and check out her books too. From what I've personally been able to read, they are nicely done as well. I do also want to take this opportunity to remind you about the new resource that's been made available. I'm sure our regular listeners will remember a few weeks back our interview with S. Douglas Woodward about his book, Lying Wonders of the Red Planet. I've talked about it a couple times on this show that the interview that Doug and I did was actually around 4 hours long, and only a portion of that interview made it to air due to time constraints. And we didn't just take the most interesting things and put those on air and then cut out the rest. It didn't work like that at all. It was actually we just took the first 2 or 3 hours or so and aired that. The last hour, a little over an hour, somewhere around that time frame, that actually has a lot more of the really hard-hitting, interesting stuff. And it almost broke my heart we weren't able to air it. But what Doug and I have decided to do is release an MP3 disc of the full extended interview, along with several other resources, including free ebooks, rarely seen pictures of Mars, much more, things of that nature. So for more information on that, you can check out my website. It's www.ministudyministry.com. And you can check Doug Woodward's website, www.faith-happens.com. It's an actual dash. You don't spell out dash, so faith-happens.com. And I'm also told it'll be available on Prophecy in the News. I believe it's to be paired with Doug's book, possibly by the time this episode airs. I'm not sure. I pre-record all my shows, so by the time this airs, it might have already been out for a while. I'm not, I don't know. So keep checking my website, Doug's website, and the Prophecy in the News website. I'll keep my website updated. I'm sure Doug will do the same, and I know Prophecy in the News will. So anyway, so there is that. All that being said, we are all out of time, so I want to thank you for watching and listening. This is The Sharpening. I am your host, Josh Peck, and as always, take care and God bless.